Okay. I will present the project of WASH Advocacy in Mozambique that is implemented by Famosi in the south of Mozambique and Estamos in the north in Niassa province. Next slide. So the issues which we are advocating for is a lack of clear policy of the centralization and accountability at the national, provincial and district level sectors for planning and budgeting in WASH, which contribute to the low waters and sanitation coverage. Here in Mozambique, most money that is put on the basket for water and sanitation come from the donors. So our government doesn't put so much money for that. So we want to work on this. Even the money is low, they must use it as their decentralization entities that can use those money to increase coverage for water and sanitation. Our policy objective is that the Ministry of Public Health and Housing and Water Resources, as well as the Ministry of State Administration and Public Function, and the Ministry of Economy and Finance, allow responsibility to the district planning, budgeting, and execution of WASH activities by 2018. We expect that at the end of the project, there will be information's community demand on WASH, and the district technicians will interact with the community and use the evidence as a tool for strengthening their role for district planning and budgeting. Next slide. In terms of context, here in Mozambique, there is a top-down approach where a budget is allocated from the top side, from the decision makers to the district government, as well as the municipal institutions. But we thought that there are three layers. The first one is the initiative that can move the advocacy for WASH, where we can find donors, where we can find civil society who work on WASH sectors, as well as we have medias. And last year it was approved, the law on media. So it's a very, very useful instrument where the media must be used to spread information on how WASH is working in Mozambique. As well as we have parliament committees that is very open for the civil society when something is on the table here in Mozambique, so we can use this kind of infrastructure to influence the environment. But the other side, the beneficiaries at the lower level, where we can find the community, they have no open channel and institutions how they can use to channel their needs to the districts in a place where they live. So this is feeding the lack of coordination and the clarity of role among stakeholders. And there's inadequate prioritization because at the top layer, sometimes they do not know what is most needed in a such community. Next slide. In terms of example, you can see in this slide the budget that was approved by the Parliament this year. At the last line, where is Cidade de Maputo, they have approved budget for investment and for poverty alleviation. That is about 20 million of meticais. When we move to the budget approved by the municipalities, next slide. There is nothing here about figures for water. The municipality have prioritized building for education, building for health, and some activity for cleaning ditches. And we see clearly that the prioritizations, there is a gap, because at the top level there are money for something special, but at the side of the municipalities they are not prioritizing investment on water. They are prioritizing investment in education, health, things that you can see as a buildings, as infrastructures, not nothing for health, in terms of sanitation, in terms of rubbish collections, in terms of water supply. And in Maputo, we have the outside, the peri-urban areas where there's no network for water supply. And the municipality is not taking into consideration for that place. Next slide. So we see in this budget that there is a highlight common gaps between public budget in Mozambique. As an example, it is the same when you go through to the slide that was ended by Estamos. You can see the same. There's an amount of money that comes from the top, but when they descend to the provincial level until to the district level, the gaps are so big, and there's no that is not well displayed, so you can understand very well which item they are going to buy or to do with that money. And most commonly, the state budget is not disaggregating, so you can see where the money that is channeled to the municipalities have to be invested for. This led that the municipality can move the money for the things that they want. It's very difficult to search and to look for what those figures of 20 million of medicals is channeled for. And sometimes they plan for something that it will be very difficult to monitor. For example, environmental education plan. What is this meaning for? And sometimes those monies is twice that done to rehabilitate something that's linked to the build of school. So it's very, very, very difficult to see what is happening there. So we will work on this, because we see that there's evidence to help the municipal council as well as the district level to channel and to spread the budget as they can use money for water and sanitation in those levels. Next slide. As we have collected most of evidence, as we have many different organizations working on water and sanitation side, we will gather at the end of this month to present the evidence and to build strong partnership around the action. And we see that with this evidence that we have, we will disclose them to the local medias, because they have openness, and we will go through debate within community radio. Thanks. Next slide. Oh, okay. It's the last one.
That's the last one. Did you have anything else you want to add? Yeah? Great. Thank you so much, Maria. Does anyone have any questions for Maria? Yeah, go ahead, Denise.
Maria, thank you very much for that presentation. Because it's a typical example of a top-down approach to development, where funds are given without any evidence and without even knowing what to do for. My issue is that I've seen your approach in the steps is to build consensus with evidence and put in the media. How do you want to engage the national level government? Is it by
We have the technical support that is gas. This is civil society forum that meets once a month and is headed by the National Director of Water. So it's possible to use this technical support group to enter to the Ministry of Water Resources and as well as to engage the Ministry of Finance, because in terms of relationships between the ministries, there are openness between them. So we must use the different initiatives that are working in water to get together and to move on.
Great. Anyone else have questions, comments for Maria? Anything from folks online? All right. Maria, thank you so much. This is really interesting, and it's a great follow-on to the presentation that Feliciano gave earlier today, because I think the collaboration that you have, where you're focused specifically on the work that's happening in Maputo and happening in a more urban context, is a good complement, but both focused on the budget component, and how are you analyzing that both, you know, at multiple levels, both urban and rural. So it's really exciting to see the work that you guys are doing in Mozambique, and how that's having an effect on, or hopefully will have an effect across the country at the different areas that you guys are working. So I did have one follow-up question before we go on to Hannah's presentation. What do you think would be, so as I just mentioned, the work that you're doing in collaboration with Feliciano in the rural area, and this is an urban area, but isn't necessarily across all the entire country. What are there other partners that you are currently engaged with, or could be, that would help translate some of the budgeting that you're doing in other places within Mozambique?
Yes, as we have this IESIS and CP, there are many organizations who are tracking the budget here in Mozambique. So we'll try to contact them in order to join the effort on this, because we are one is in the north and one is in the south. So we think that between the countries, there's nothing that can come up. So engaging the other initiatives on WASH, we think that will spread the message and we'll have more in the basket.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're going to move into Hannah's presentation. Great. It's up. So Hannah is here in the room with us. So you can follow her presentation online, as we have for all of the other ones. And Hannah, don't forget to tell me when you want to advance. So on to the next slide.
Hi, everyone. This is Hannah Woodburn. I am the Acting Secretary and Director for the Global Public-Private Partnership for Hand Washing. I'd imagine most of you are familiar with our organization, but we're a coalition of 10 steering committee partners who all work together to promote hand washing with soap. We've been around for over 10 years. We did Global Hand Washing Day. So that's a little bit of our background. You can go on to the next slide. I'm going to talk about our role in advocating for the Sustainable Development Goals. Excuse me. We've been working on this advocacy effort for about 2 years now, and then been doing broader advocacy. So I'm going to talk about our experience and kind of what we've learned and successes and challenges, things like that. So first of all, we are really pleased that hygiene is in the Sustainable Development Goals. It's included in Target 6.2. The challenge forthcoming is that there's not an indicator guarantee for hygiene, which means that it will not be measured at the global level unless an indicator is included. So we're still very much in the advocacy stage of all of this, so just kind of keep that in mind as I go through the presentation. So the two main kind of advocacy workflows that we've been doing for the Sustainable Development Goals is capacity building, and then direct advocacy and communications. Throughout my presentation, I'll break it down into the two of them because they're similar but different enough that I think it's relevant to kind of separate them a little bit. So as far as capacity building goes, this really involves developing materials and disseminating them to people who are working in the country, in the field. So we have an advocacy toolkit. We work with supporters on helping to clarify the process. As I'm sure you know, working anything with the UN can be very confusing and things change very quickly. So helping to kind of make that more accessible to people who aren't policy wonks. And then identifying specific opportunities for people to be engaged. So responding to consultations, providing input, really helping to motivate people, enable them to be involved in the process. And then upcoming is Global Handwashing Day. This year we'll be doing a lot more advocacy messages around Global Handwashing Day and the indicators. In terms of direct advocacy and communications, the PPPHW is involved in a number of working groups. The most prominent one is the JMP Communications and Advocacy Working Group, where we work on specifically making sure that hygiene is included in our messaging and the types of materials we're producing. And then direct advocacy that we're doing, we have coordinated hygiene advocacy letters and petitions to send to key member states and stakeholders at the UN. Responding to consultations, and then communications efforts. So really trying to raise the profile of hygiene on the global level. So doing op-eds and blogs and other written publications on a variety of platforms, just to try to kind of get the message about hygiene out and use this as an opportunity to talk about hygiene. Next slide. So we've had some successes. In capacity building, we've developed new tools. We've increased knowledge among practitioners in an area that was foreign to many of them, engaged with our audience in a new way. A lot of the materials and kind of capacity building that we did previously was really centered around program implementation instead of advocacy. So we talked as an organization about doing advocacy, which we did, but we didn't really enable people to advocate to their governments, to their leadership on these key issues. So we started to engage with them in a new way. I think it's been really exciting, and it's certainly been challenging, which I'll talk about next. For the advocacy and communication side of things, a huge success is hygiene is in the SDGs. That's probably the most prominent one. And then also we've raised the profile of hygiene. So there are more organizations and individuals within the WASH sector who are saying what are sanitation and hygiene. And people outside of the WASH sector are recognizing that hygiene is important. So especially in the sectors like nutrition or education, really like identifying that hygiene is crucial for making sure girls stay in school, or fighting stunting through making sure children don't get diarrhea. So I would say those are some really big successes, and those can be built on going forward. So we've had some challenges and subsequent lessons. For capacity building, I think one of our biggest challenges is that when you're talking about indicators and SDGs and all of this, it's wonky. And that can be really difficult to translate that kind of challenging, acronym-driven environment to something that's understandable to a wide number of people in different contexts. So what we tried to do, and what the lesson that we learned, was that really connecting people with the content, identifying why it matters to them. So saying indicators matter because what gets measured gets done. Connecting indicators with why we measure things at the project level, because that's how you know progress. And then also quickly changing context. Within the SDGs, there's been a lot of touch points as well as messaging that's changed and needed to change. And so for me, it's been saying, where is the best opportunity to mobilize resources? Where's the best opportunity to encourage people to advocate, instead of saying every consultation that comes up, participate in this, because then people stop listening. I would stop listening. It's just human nature. And so really trying to be very strategic in the opportunities that we have, and making sure that we're really using those opportunities to their best advantage possible. On the advocacy and communication side of things, it was mentioned before the challenge of having multiple stakeholders who have multiple interests. And I would say that's been a huge challenge in this. My organization works on hand washing with soap, but menstrual hygiene management is a crucial part of hygiene. And I think that in this context, when we've talked about hygiene, that has been difficult because they're both hygiene, but they're so different, and the behaviors are different, the stigmas around them are different, the outcomes are different, the ways of measuring them is different, but they all get lumped into hygiene. And so that's been really challenging to balance the different stakeholders who care about hygiene in really trying to figure out how we can speak with one voice to make as big an impact as possible while representing those various interests. And then also, this is a very communication-specific challenge that we faced, but it can be difficult to measure the impact of the deliverables. So if you're doing a lot of communication efforts, you can say, well, we had a lot of hits on this blog, but you could also be talking to the echo chamber. So you could be talking to people who already care about hygiene, the people who are in the room already. And so that's a big challenge as to how to get our materials disseminated. And I think that there's so much you can do with measurement, but also trying to figure out what's your actual versus your perceived audience. So I did a blog recently, I think it was an interview for someone else's blog, and I was really excited about the opportunity because I thought that they were going to have this really big audience of people who would not be the people that I would reach, and that wasn't the case. And so really kind of thinking through about, when you're communicating, are you actually making a difference? And that might change what you do before. I know a lot of organizations spend a ton of time and energy on things like blogs, and they might not have as big an impact as they hope. So just trying to think through those things a little bit more. And so what's next? As we look to what's next, I hope that we can use our lessons from the capacity building side of things to translate what we've learned into the new context post-2015. So how do we use these people who we've now trained in advocacy a little bit to help continue that momentum going forward? Using annual events as touch points, so really ramping up Global Handwashing Day as an advocacy opportunity. So making sure that the messaging around Global Handwashing Day isn't just about washing your hands, but that your government has a responsibility to you to provide hand washing stations in schools and healthcare facilities. So really trying to use these big days where we already have a huge audience and a lot of people involved to get messaging that's very impactful in the long term as well in terms of policy. And then on the advocacy and communication side of things, continuing to engage new advocates and building up momentum. So continuing to engage with people in the nutrition and education sectors, making sure that we don't just stop these efforts now that we have an SDG, but that we really continue them and continue to make them dynamic and relevant going forward. So that's what I have to say about our advocacy efforts at the PPHW. I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Anyone have questions?
And if you go to the next slide, my contact information is there. That's useful for people who are on the phone.
Yeah. Tobias, go ahead.
Yeah, some comments, Hannah. Thank you very much for that suggestion. And something you say real. I work for, I support the sanitation hygiene technical in Kenya. And that combines menstrual hygiene management and hand washing. Sometimes you have people who are more on menstrual hygiene and not really hand washing. Other people have discussed about hand washing as a hygiene major issue, not just hand washing. We have had issues what people say we work in trachoma areas. They also say hand washing and face washing.
Yep.
Is that part of hygiene? Can you put that together?
Yeah.
I don't know how you want us to put this together and work together or separate them, or work them separately.
Yeah.
How do you?
I think that's. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of not talking about face washing, and there have been some programs that have tried to integrate in schools hand washing and face washing. And then you get into like food hygiene, which is another category of hygiene. So when we're talking about the SDGs, it seems most likely that there'll be an indicator for hand washing with soap. And so from my perspective, it's better to just focus on that, because if we focus on too much, we might not get anything. But beyond that, I think it's totally valid and necessary to continue to say hygiene, and these are the different aspects of it. Yeah.
No, combining
I have a comment for Hannah.
Jane?
Jane, hold on 1 second. Catherine's gonna go, and then we'll come to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. good presentation. Now, you see, hygiene, we have been focusing on hand washing soap. But for me, as I want to say a champion who is focusing on mental hygiene, it is not an add-on, but it's a very important component of hygiene promotion because it's touching on the personal hygiene, especially on the women who had been forgotten. So we should separate them because it's really personal hygiene for all of us now that we're focusing on women. My second comment, I think it was I'm happy that in Kenya we are now focusing on messages for hygiene promotion. I think even there's a meeting next Tuesday. Yes, messages, common messages that can give out proper information about hygiene promotion.
Yeah, that's great. Jane, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Hannah, for sharing the good work that you're doing. I have only two. We know that what you are doing is so much behavior change communication, a very complicated process. And when it comes to countries like ours, like Uganda, trying to even move that whole process from the private realm to the public so that it can be connected with, the real health issues is not easy. We still hear comments like, surely, do you need government or a civil society organization to talk about hand washing with soap? Can't we talk about other issues? Is that an issue? And we are moving progressively through that process and connecting it to the real high-level health issues, that if you don't wash your hands with soap before eating, before using the toilet, these are the implications, with not statistics, but real evidence from the districts, from the villages. And that kind of information is fully resident with the district health offices. So it's still a long and huge struggle. I know your organization in Uganda, FHI 360, is doing a lot of work across the board, and they've been singing behavior change communication and hygiene and hand washing. We have a whole hand washing with soap campaign and a whole secretariat. So it's not easy, and the slippage is very high. One time the statistics are very good, then another year they all go down and you wonder what happened. And then you'll also get comments from the villages. Recently we did work in one of the remote villages doing a documentary, and my kids received questions like, surely we don't even have money to buy salt. You're telling us, and to use that small piece of soap that we have bought to put it next to a toilet, you people are joking. Or to say, they are comparing it with many other things, and because they buy small pieces of soap, and it's the same piece they use to wash their bodies, to wash their hands, to wash their utensils. So how far can they go in terms of cutting it up into pieces? You go to the villages and you know that people actually bathe without soap. They just can't afford it. So it's a whole process that is hinged on costs, incomes, health, and we shouldn't give up because then sometimes it can be discouraging. Then my second comment is around what you said in terms of the difficulties in measuring communication or information that has been disseminated. That is a long term problem that has been on board for a long time, because it's not so much of a software, but measuring it goes beyond just looking at statistics. It's looking at that change and being able to say that particular change, or what in IRS we call the aha moment, that aha moment occurred because of this intervention. Trying to pin it down to that particular intervention can be complicated. But I know you also know that there are a number of tools that have been developed. But some of these tools work very well at national level, at district level, and then you wonder how you can actually use them at household level, at the schools level, at community level. So I think we need to continue developing tools that fit the different contexts that we work in. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments. I think you're spot on about the challenges, and I think that the reminder that soap in some areas is like a luxury item is really well taken. I think especially as we look to the Sustainable Development Goals, and if we're really trying to get universal coverage for hand washing, we need to be aware that it's in some instances, it's just not an economic reality for people to be able to afford soap for hand washing. So I really appreciate that point. I think that's it's really good that you made that.
Can I also make a comment?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Two short comments. The first one is you made a remark about the difficulty or the challenges you sometimes face regarding the multiple stakeholders to balance objectives of the different stakeholders to speak with one voice. And I was very curious also because you're one of the few public-private partnerships working on advocacy. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the challenges you face and also how to cope with them and to tackle them, so to say? So that's one. And the second one is about the whole SDG process and especially the indicators. Well, at first, congratulations with the hygiene is in the mission of the Transforming Our World, the outcome document as it is now. So I think that's a big achievement. So very, very well done. But of course, the big part missing is the global indicator for hygiene. So I know, for example, WaterAid is also lobbying very hard on this issue. What are you doing in the remaining months to trying to achieve this global indicator, and how can the global WASH community help you, or can we help each other to achieve this?
Yeah, thank you. I'm certainly not going to take any credit for being the SDGs. As I think it was a really huge effort on the part of many organizations and individuals with a lot more influence than myself. But I'm excited about it nonetheless. I think that going forward, there's a few key opportunities. One of the ones that I've been working on is together with WaterAid and the JMP group, where we are coordinating a sector-wide response to the proposed indicator list. There's a consultation that's going on right now, and so we've drafted a response to the consultation saying that hygiene is not optional, it's essential. And I'll make sure that everyone in this meeting gets a copy of that and the ability to provide comments. We're accepting comments through the 1st of September, and then we'll finalize it and send it around for signatures. On the hygiene petition that we sent, or the advocacy letter that we sent, we ended up having over 100 organizations from around the world, and a number of those were coalition organizations. So the total number is even larger than that, and I think it was really exciting for me to see so many organizations wanting to lend their support to hygiene, and so we're hoping to be able to do that again. And then obviously Global Hand Washing Day and talking about the importance of measuring hygiene. This year's theme is Raise the Hand for Hand Washing, and so it lends itself very well to saying both I'm raising a hand for hygiene as I'm affiliating myself as someone who washes their hands, who values it, as well as asking governments. It can be used to say, raise a hand for hygiene so you can be counted as a hand washer. So all of the materials for that are on our website, globalhandwashingday.org. And then I'm sorry, I don't recall what your first question was. Oh, about challenges of working with a public-private partnership. Sorry, it's the end of a long day and I'm slightly jet-lagged. I think that one of the things we've been really fortunate in is that in hand washing with soap, there's not a lot of controversy, and there's also not as much stigma as there are among some other parts of global health and WASH. And so it hasn't been that difficult to find messaging that we can all agree on, excluding some, kind of minutia. But I think by and large, hand washing is so recognizable as something that's easy and effective and affordable, that makes it really easy. I think it more comes with really making sure that we're representing the best interests of the hygiene community writ large.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else have any thoughts, ideas, questions, comments for either Maria or Anna? All right. So we're in the very last stages. I am extremely excited, champions, because they are still online. Maria, Jane, and Morel, I think you guys are phenomenal. And the next time I see you, I don't know, I'll probably have some kind of treat or a hug or something for you guys. So the last piece that we're going to cover today is in two parts. We're going to talk, it's mostly focused on next steps. I'm going to cover and do a quick presentation on a landscape that we're doing, and then we're going to talk about what actually are the next steps, what's coming down the pipeline, both for events and things that we're to continue this type of dialogue, but then also in the future, so 2015, after 2015 ends, 2016 and kind of beyond, what does that look like? So WASH Advocates, here. So WASH Advocates has been around since about 2005 with a couple name iterations over time. And in 2005, there were several advocacy landscapes that were done to look at both the U.S. WASH sector, the funding community, and the global WASH sector in different pieces. And as WASH Advocates will be sunsetting at the end of the year, we felt like there was an important need since it's been 5 years, to take a look at WASH Advocacy, slightly looking back, and then also looking at what are the recommendations that we can leave with the sector, and where are the gaps. So, why would we do a landscape? So, like I said, we're going to be sunsetting, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge that we've acquired and things that we've seen historically change over time. Since 2005, there have been significant changes in the way that WASH advocacy has evolved, especially within the United States. The number of actors has increased significantly. The amount of funding that's going towards WASH advocacy has maintained at a pretty steady pace, but the advocacy outcomes that have come from all of the efforts of the WASH advocates in the U.S. Has increased budgets exponentially in the U.S. over that kind of 10-year time frame. So in the U.S. we've seen significant changes, and since I've only been in the WASH sector for I would say a drop in the bucket in comparison to especially a lot of people in the room and on the phone, but I've also seen the capacity and the level of advocacy at the regional and local or in-country level in developing countries has changed significantly as well, especially within the last 10 to 15 years. As I had mentioned before, in 2010, there was a U.S. landscape that was done by a guy named Brooks Keene, who used to work for CARE, based in the U.S., and that was really to look at the policy advocacy and budgeting for WASH in the U.S. and the role that WASH advocates and advocates more broadly has played. And so at around the same time in 2010, there was a little bit of a global / funding advocacy landscape that was done by FSG, And so we felt that it was necessary to take a look at both of those documents and assess what are the gaps, what has changed since in the last 5 years, where are we now, and what should we do moving forward. So we wanted to document the momentum and to really look at those gaps. So, history. I'm not going to go into all of the history. The document will be circulated sometime in mid-September to everyone here. And of course, we're always welcome input because, again, we only have as much knowledge as is in my head, John's head, other contributors, and so we can only document as much research as we can find, online and through conversations. So I'm sure there'll be things that we're missing, but we'll do our best to include those. We're going to kind of send it out for a massive consultation with anyone that will listen to make sure that it's as comprehensive as possible. But basically, the history and the structure that we've that the report will come out with is talking about both U.S. and European advocacy, focused on grassroots, and then what we call grass tops. And the grass tops advocacy is everyone from politicians. So it's not engaging local citizens. It's not increasing funding, let's say, at a very localized level, or budgets at a very localized level, but it's really about engaging. It's not awareness-raising campaigns, but it's really the high-level conversations. And so it'll cover some of the grass top successes that we've had, or just the lack of success sometimes that we've had in the challenges. And then the U.S. and European focus is on foreign assistance, because that's where a lot of that is coming from. The capacity building component will be mostly the focus of in developing countries, but looking at national coalitions, looking at regional coalitions, looking at, for example, the ICC in Kenya, or the work of the national coordination conversations that are happening in Uganda, and there are examples of those happening in other places. It'll talk about some of the work that Raul was talking about earlier. So just kind of trying to document a lot of these historical components and putting it in a timeline to see how advocacy has increased over time, and also to help identify some of those gaps. When we talk about the global, we'll just touch on the International Advocacy Days. So like Hannah was talking about, some of the stuff around Global Handwashing Day, the decades, the International Water and Sanitation Decade, the Year of Sanitation. There's all these kind of big UN things that have happened over time. And then talking about public-private partnerships, talking about these coalitions that exist more at a global level, the role that SWA has in time. So, so that's a little brief history. So the future recommendations, and this is just kind of a snapshot of some of the things that will be in as far as our recommendations are concerned, and the information that we talked about today. So when we did that kind of brainstorming about what's really needed to make WASH advocates successful, are also components that will go in there, because those are the types of things that we're hearing over and over again. And I think the one of the advantages that WASH advocates has at this moment is that we hear and talk to a lot of people all the time. So it's sometimes difficult, for folks in Guatemala to know what's happening in Kenya, but because we hear from both sides, we can try to synthesize what are some of the common trends that are happening around advocacy in each of those places. So on U.S.-based advocacy, so it doesn't say anything to continue to focus on. The reason it doesn't say anything there is because the continue to focus on is everything that they're already doing. So to continue to focus on budgets, continuing to integrate the language and information into U.S. policies. For example, we've done a lot of work, as Jordan mentioned before, with the NTD community and the nutrition. There's a maternal and child health bill. So finding those types of policies and legislative processes that we can insert WASH into, as opposed to having standalone legislation specifically for WASH, but to continue to do the work that's already happening. We are, at least in the U.S., I can say we're pretty lucky that we've been able to kind of kick butts into gear, and people are now, for a number of years, we're not the only ones who are doing this advocacy. So it's great to encourage the partners that we've been working with in the U.S. to continue that work. Donor engagement. One of the biggest, I would say, challenges, and something that just continues to be the largest gap in advocacy, is with the donor community. Those were some of the largest gaps identified in both of the 2010 reports that came out from FSG and from CARE, and they continue. We at WASH Advocates have tried to do a little bit on that, but I think that there is an opportunity to identify that this is still a gap, and maybe make some recommendations on what are some of the ways that we can engage donors more effectively, and to make them smarter advocates in their own right. So there will be, within the report, specific recommendations on how to engage donors and what could be done. And it's less, some of that is about funding advocacy, and recommendations on how to increase the funding for advocacy at the developing country level, because the reality is, as we look at financing for WASH and we look at a lot of these things on more of the programmatic side, as John mentioned earlier, we need to be integrating this on a more regular basis. So how do you ensure that when you talk to, whether it be a USAID or a large foundation like the Gates Foundation, that they see the added value and having a component of the work, whether it be 50% or 100% of someone's time, going solely to advocacy, and that it's integrated into the work that's already happening. Strengthening advocacy capacity in developing countries. As we talked about before, that is a big recommendation. The planning process and being strategic in the way that we do advocacy is really important, and so that will be a huge recommendation, with a massive list of all the resources that we know that are out there that can be used or adapted at the very local level to identify what are your priorities and how do you go through the process to make it your advocacy as effective as possible. Coordination, more effective coordination, and that is across all countries. And I think probably a lot of this seems like, oh, this is not news. We should always have more effective coordination. What we will try to do in the report is to give specific examples of how coordination could be improved. So what type of coordination? We're not saying everyone needs to work together all the time. We're not saying a blanket statement of speak with one voice, but really specific concrete examples of how you go about more effective coordination, and some examples of where that has been effective. And then the last piece is building on existing work. There is a lot of work around advocacy, and so how do you tap into other sectors and the work that they're doing on advocacy? The Sun Civil Society work, or the Scale Up Nutrition work, is a great example. There's a network that already exists, and they are interested in reaching out to WASH partners. So how do you integrate those components into kind of their larger process around nutrition, but ensuring that WASH is a component of that on the advocacy side, not on the programmatic necessarily, but when they're looking at national level or subnational level nutrition policies and funding for nutrition, that WASH isn't something that's an afterthought. So building off of existing networks that are already there, learning and knowledge management is not something that's up there, but how do we have future conversations and collaboration that are similar to what we're doing here on a larger scale, or even on a smaller scale, but ensuring that that is not something that's lost over time. So quickly, does anyone have questions, comments, ideas? What could I be missing? All of the above.
I have some questions.
Yeah, please.
About the donor engagement side of things.
Yeah.
Are you envisioning that being like all donors or government foundations? And then when you say you want them to be involved in like advocacy besides funding, just advocacy, are you envisioning them having a larger role in talking to other donors or to governments?
Yes. So when I say donors, I mean everybody from national level governments in developing countries to developed country governments and the funding they're putting towards foreign assistance, and then also private funding. So corporations, foundations, private philanthropists, and each of their roles is very different, and they have a lot of rules against advocacy. But the reality is, as we're talking about things like public sector finance, which came up earlier, why is it that, I mean, they have interaction with government and a lot of times can get a meeting that we cannot get. And so how do we ensure that they are in line with the messaging that is most appropriate, but still in line with the work that they're doing? The other piece to that is, it's, again, like you said, it's not only the funding of advocacy. That's one piece. We want to increase what their willingness to fund components of advocacy, but how can they use their voice? I would say I'm going to put Rotary in that category for a second. Rotary is a really interesting, an interesting cat, if you want to call them, I don't know, an interesting space and people. But they're not the only ones. The Lions Clubs, all of those types of civic engagement groups have their best asset is their voice. They like to fund things. That's great. But how can we engage them more effectively in advocacy? So every time that there is, for example, an ICC in Kenya, is there a Rotarian that's part of that? Likely yes, because there are a lot of, most of the high-level government folks in the Ministry of Water, my understanding is that most of them are Rotarians. I don't know if that's true, that's just what I heard through the grapevine, but I think Rotary has the opportunity to influence, and so how do you strengthen their capacity as a donor, right, because a lot of times they view themselves as a donor, to advocate more effectively for all different levels, using their role as someone as a person of influence, but then also using their role as someone who is interested and cares and comes from the community in which they're trying to do that. And that applies to developed and developing countries because there are millions of Rotarians all around. So it's that type of recommendations for how to engage.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all great. I was just...
Sure, no, that's fine. Any other questions from folks in the room or online? Catherine.
Okay, your opening sentence was not very nice. Eh? It was something to do with sunset.
Oh, yes.
And then we have activities, yeah?
Yes. Okay, so maybe for those that don't know, WASH Advocates will close its doors at the end of the year. So we as an organization will no longer exist. And so the idea behind this is to ensure that as many of the gaps and the work that we've been doing will translate to and lateral to other organizations as a possibility, but also that we share with everyone, you know, the WASH sector and all of our partners, the knowledge that we've acquired over the last 10 years. So yes, for those of you that can't see, Catherine seems like she's not very happy with me right now. Yeah. So there are, but that's actually a very good point, that we're going to go into some of the things that will happen with us over the next 6 months, but then also what does the future of advocacy look like? Because there are a lot of actors that are that have been working for a long time. I think we, probably due to a lot of our voices, being John, myself, Jordan, and some of our past colleagues, have become those voices that are loud and in your face. So we have made our presence known, and so we're hoping that we can mitigate our exit and making our presence mitigate the, I don't know, I forgot what I was going to say, but basically making sure that we're not mixed as much as possible. I don't know. Apparently not really good at articulating at almost 5 o'clock here. And so any other questions or ideas, thoughts, things I've missed? Any folks on online? John Oldfield. Oh, sorry.
In the afternoon, maybe you just circulate this to us afterwards.
Yes. Yes. So we'll circulate the draft. We're happy to circulate the draft to everyone, probably by the end of the week, this week. And just remember, it's still in draft form, and we're open to all feedback. But it'll go over, everything that I talked about, history and all of the above. Jane, you had something, and then John will go to you.
In terms of, I was just looking at in terms of future and recommendations. I was wondering where the governments themselves can be fully targeted as a cluster on their own. Listening to Amanda in the morning on how to engage with the ministries of finance, and also recalling one of the meetings I participated in where we had officials from the Ministry of Finance. I think government is a category on its own. When I talk about strengthening advocacy, for them it's not really strengthening, it's beyond understanding. They understand, but do they appreciate? Then what happens next? I think they can also be targeted as a group on their own.
Great.
The ministries of finance, the ministries of water and irrigation, or water and environment, public health and sanitation, all those ministries that are responsible for WASH, targeted with different tools, with a different message, so that they are on board. Because they're the ones that you list there. You have tried, many people have tried, many institutions have tried, but getting to not just know how government, but how to get government involved in advocacy, so that they don't look at it as a political party, opposition political party, but as one of those channels that they also need to improve on the way they engage with the World Banks, with UNICEF, with those big organizations that also fund our governments.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Jane. And I'll make sure that that's added to, that there's a whole section on that, because I think one of the things that I think a lot of the, we often pull them, we often pull them out as a group that we're advocating to, as opposed to ones that we're advocating with. And I think that's a key point that will definitely be in the landscape, that there is opportunity. If there is, for example, capacity building, let's say a workshop or a seminar about, or how to create more effective strategies for advocacy, there is no reason why government be invited, because it's more internal within the government. But I think that there's the opportunity to engage and increase their appreciation, as well as support for advocacy. I think that's a great point. Thanks, Jane. John.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of quick things. First of all, I look forward to seeing this draft.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Huh.
Really interesting.
Thanks, John.
Secondly, just a couple of things more helpful. This donor engagement business is, of course, awfully interesting, and I think the real long-term answer to that is what we talked about earlier, which is mainstreaming advocacy into programs. So it's yes, there's us, in the advocacy sector going out and approaching private philanthropists, presumably for funding for advocacy, and then there's more of an operational approach. So that's just one thing that might be considered in the recommendations if you haven't already.
Yeah.
Secondly, there are two major sources of funding for advocacy. One is WASH funders that we can convince to fund advocacy for WASH, and the second is advocacy funders that we can convince to fund WASH advocacy. So and I wish Fundación Novena is a perfect example of that. They are not a WASH funder. However, they fund advocacy for WASH as a means to the end of their ultimate goal of making societies throughout Latin America more open, democratic, transparent, and so on. Mm-hmm. So they're a non-traditional funder of WASH advocacy, and there's all sorts of groups like Humanity United, like George Soros's Empire Open Society foundations that could and should be approached far better than we at WASH Advocates have when thinking about the future of WASH advocacy. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. So on that note, I want to talk about next steps. Clearly, the distribution of the landscape is a next step. And I want to briefly turn it over to Patrick to talk a little bit more about WASH It. And then I'll come back and we'll finish with the, I would say, very tangible next steps of what will happen when we all leave each other in about 10 to 15 minutes. So, Patrick, over to you.
Okay, so WASH It. WASH It is a new initiative, just started up. Hopefully, it will start in the 1st of January next year. Specifically focusing on the strengthening of civil society's ability to advocate for WASH within what the Dutch would call a broad water framework. So it's WASH and broader water resource management. And it has two. So one set of objectives relates to strengthening the capacity of civil society for advocacy, and one set of objectives relate to improve water governance writ large. So in the theory of change for this initiative, we say the challenge, the overall, the providing WASH services that are sustainable, managing our water resources sustainably, is writ large a governance problem. Now, you can call that enabling environment, you can call it governance, you can call it management, or whatever, but it isn't primarily a financial or a hardware problem. It's a governance issue, and the voice of civil society is critical in achieving good governance. That's the framing. WASH It is going to work at local, district, national, Netherlands / European and international levels. It's going to work in two main focus countries, Uganda and Kenya. So when it's also going to work, and then in another 4 countries with slightly lower level of intensity. This is basically finance driven. We have ambition to grow it beyond these countries, but this is where we start, which is Ghana, Mali, India, and Bangladesh. I have to be a bit careful because nothing's signed, but we think that we're looking at about 60 million euros spend over 5 years at this point. But that's we're in the final negotiations now with the Netherlands government. And the core partnership of this initiative is ourselves, IRC, leading, Simavi, Saru, who's talking to us there, ACFO, who a lot of you know, and obviously very big on the whole open data side of things, and then Wetlands International, who are maybe less well known in the WASH community, but have a big profile in water resource management. So that's the core partnership, and it's very closely related. In fact, we're all members of the Dutch WASH Alliance, which Tobias is the Kenyan figurehead. So we're kicking off, and I think, you know, as I've talked about with yourself and John, as much as possible, we're looking wherever possible and however usefully possible, pick up, you know, what you guys have already developed and take it forward. And so they'll shame your sunsetting, and I just think that's such an awesome American term for something that sort of, well, I suppose sunsets can be sad too, but I wish you guys were sunsetting. Sunrising, better. But you know, as the sun sets on you, the sun rises on WASH It, but we're all committed, as I say, to WASH It being a start. You know, to build this as a kind of beacon of what advocacy in WASH can be and can look like, and to try and pull in more resources to it and to grow it outside of those countries. So that's it. I think we're having a little launch, some sort of. It's not a launch event because we can't launch until we signed it, but we are having an event at our stand at the, which I'll send folks all the announcements about, I think on Tuesday. Cool.
Great.
Is that rule? I know exactly when it's just not being disorganized. But anyway, I'll send them out.
Okay, great.
Monday 5:30.
Monday rule.
Monday at 5:15, you said?
5:30 at stand B18.
Okay.
So
what?
So from 5:30 to 6:30 on Monday.
Can I add something small?
Yes.
Yeah, 5:30 to 6:30. Hold on 1 second, Jane. 5:30 to 6:30. B what?
B18. 1-8.
Oh, great. And we'll make sure that everyone has that, and we'll let you know if anything, if there's any materials or other things that come out of it.
And stuff, right? Cool.
Jane, you wanted to add something. Please go ahead.
Just to add to what Patrick has said, at the country level in Uganda, next we have 2 meetings around WASH It. The first one is on 26th, where the 4 partners will be meeting and talking about WASH It. Simavi will join us online, but Wetlands International and ACVO will both travel to Kampala. They're both based in Nairobi, and we'll have the meeting at the IRC office. And then on 27th and 28th, the Royal Netherlands Embassy in Kampala is convening a meeting of all the different the alliances that are in Uganda, will be working in Uganda on WASH It, to share what we want to do, how we want to do it, and to also meet each other, one another, and talk, but also meet the officials that will be in charge of WASH It at the embassy. So we'll spend 2 full days washing it.
That's great.
Actually, you know, one thing that I've been a bit remiss in saying, and it's because it is all quite a new initiative, and I think areas of it are quite confused still because it's new policy, but also quite exciting, is that actually the other part of it who I forgot to mention is DGIS itself. So these are explicitly positioned as partnerships between civil society and the ministry. So, and they're from the top political level, they're very committed to being a part. They're still working out what that actually means.
Yeah.
But that's why, as James mentioned, you know, they're having this whole day at the embassy. So, and what we've been saying, you know, and the Dutch term for what they call it samenpraten, which is speaking together and speaking confrontationally. So the whole object, the minister comes from an NGO background and has this very strong view that the proper role of civil society is holding to account.
Yeah.
So and everything we've been talking about, supporting on the one hand, but also pushing where necessary. So I think it's got a lot of potential to be quite exciting. And I think it's, you know, in terms, you know, John, you were saying, what can we do to help? Or, you know, what can we do to help? I think that they are putting up a good example of how donors can engage themselves in supporting advocacy, which is one of your questions, you know. And I think that, you know, as we get our act together and sign off finally and begin to launch properly, I think the first thing is just to stay engaged, to keep talking to us, and to help us to put the message out. And I mean, I'm really keen that we then try and find ways to grow this, actually, to get other partners in and other donors in.
Yeah, great. So on that note, we have about just a couple minutes left, and I want to talk about some of the tangible things that will happen going forward. So from today, we have a number of notes. We've been recording the entire thing. So what we're going to do is divide it out into the different sections, and we will post the information online. So there was a number of people. There were a lot of people invited that, unfortunately, because of travel and a variety of reasons, were not able to be here, but are not only interested but have a huge voice in advocacy, and so we'll make sure that they're engaged in this as well. So we'll be posting all this online, and then Jordan and myself and John will be working on, and probably Patrick, he doesn't know that yet, we'll be working on a kind of wrap-up to this that talks less about documenting what we talked about today. People can go online and listen for themselves, but really some of the outcome pieces, some of the success stories, the other things that were shared that are going to be helpful for others within the WASH and beyond sectors. So more of an outcome type of document than anything else. And then in October, at the University of North Carolina, there will be a conference. And that conference will be doing a broad session for anyone from the conference who wants to attend on the future of advocacy, or the future of WASH advocacy. We're going to actually be presenting a couple of different, so the landscape will be presented, but then also a couple of other, some interesting practical research, action-based research that documents some really interesting advocacy efforts. And so that'll be more of an open session, but there'll also be a closed session that is more brainstorming and more commitment focused on the future of advocacy. So more along the lines of what we've talked about in the last 15 minutes, we're going to start there and have a whole half day or 4-ish hours. So at this point, it's in person only. But we will figure out if we can do something similar, because we know that not everyone can be there. And so hopefully we can try to align timing. We'll do our best. And with the mechanism that we have set up today, which seems to have worked 90% of the time, we'll see if we can open it up so that there are other voices that can be heard as part of that session. So those two things are happening, and then the last piece that I want to mention is that we will be in communication with, and have been already with a lot of you, but we'll continue to be in communication about what we're calling some of the lateraling of our work at WASH Advocates. So who wants to take on what we're doing? Thanks, guys. But really thinking about how we can support the work that you're doing over the next 6 months, but then also, are there pieces and things we can leave you with that will be helpful for you to use even after our offices are closed? So I want to take this last moment to thank all of you for sticking around and for joining at all today. I know that I hope that you got out of it as much as I did, and really appreciate all of the efforts that went in and the feedback that everyone provided and all the presenters that spent their time prepping and presenting today. So thanks again, and look for emails from Jordan and I after the fact. And at that point, I think we're 5 o'clock, and it's happy hour here and happy hour for anywhere. So I'm sure that those of you on the phone are probably ready to go home. So thanks again, and we look forward to talking with you very soon. So thanks, everybody. Take care. And
thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right.